Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. And today is going to be a comparison video. I used to do these a lot more and I need to get back into it because they're really fun videos to do. In this case, I'm taking a look at two knives that are actually really favorites of mine. I really like both of these knives. I've reviewed them both very favorably. And when I did review this knife, this is the Zero Tolerance 0393, you may recall that I said at that time, these two kind of reminded me of one another. All right. Now, since we're kind of talking about this comparison, let me add that Dr. Frunke has done a comparison between the Reate knives Torrent and the 0392, which is sort of a higher end version of this. It's the factory custom collaboration between Zero Tolerance and Hinderer, where this is just a straight production Zero Tolerance. And so if you want to see that video, check the description box and I will put a link to that down below. He does a great job over there, but probably draws different conclusions than I will. And of course, he's a huge fan of the 0392 with good reason. And so we'll probably have some differences of opinion along those lines. Now, let's go ahead and get into our comparison. The first thing I want to get out of the way, and we've already kind of pointed to it, is price. This guy goes for around $220. This guy goes for around $350. Both of these are fairly widely available right now, but Reate models tend to come and go. They'll do a run and then you won't see any more for a while. And they've recently done a run of the Torrent, so they're fairly easy to get a hold of. As those sell down, there won't be as many of these available out there, where this, as a regular production ZT, should be pretty easy to get your hands on anytime you're watching this video. So just wanted to put that out there in case you're watching this and going to go out and try to find one or both of these knives. You may have a bit of a struggle with the Reate depending on when you're watching. So now that we've kind of gotten some of the introductory stuff out of the way, let's get into the comparisons and we'll work through the various features of these knives as if it were a sort of a review. We'll use that same format and just kind of compare and contrast and discuss the differences between these two models. So we want to start with size and weight. All right, the 0393 is 8 5/16 overall, so just a little more than 8 1/4 inches. The blade length here is 3 5/8. The handle length is 4 7/8, and the weight on this guy is only 5 ounces, which is pretty nice for a knife of this size and construction. Moving over to the Reate, we have 5 1/2 inches overall, 3 5/8 on the blade again, 4 7/8, really closer to 4 15/16 on the overall length, on the close length, I'm sorry. And this guy weighs in at 5.9 ounces, so pretty hefty in comparison. Now, in terms of how these carry in pocket, there's one other point that we should make, and that is the clip is movable on the ZT, not on the Reate. In terms of how these carry in pocket, you do notice this is overall a larger knife just in general. Okay, so it's larger in this dimension, larger in the handle width right here, and they are very similar in this dimension. However, the way the Zero Tolerance does the G10 overlay makes this feel a little bit thinner in pocket and actually makes it feel a little bit thinner in hand as well. But that's an ergonomic point that we're not quite ready to discuss yet. So there is more material going on here with the Reate, and that does translate into a heavier knife. And so if you're really concerned about how this is going to carry, and if you really don't like knives that are a little on the heavier side, then certainly you're going to want to lean toward the Zero Tolerance. I would say in terms of comfort of carry and overall weight per performance, okay, I guess if that's a designation I can use. In terms of, how much you have to carry for how much performance you're going to get out of that tool, certainly the Zero Tolerance has got to be declared the winner in this case because of that fairly light weight for its size. Moving on now to the blade, here we're going to find an awful lot of similarity. So on the ZT, we have 20 CV steel. We have sort of a compound-ish grind. We have DLC coating on the flats. And we have a harpoon swedge here, which is really, really nice. Over on the Reate, we have M390 instead of 20 CV. We have stonewash on, and a fairly heavy stonewash on the flats, satin on the grinds, and again, that harpoon swedge that does carry all the way back. Both of these blades are very, very similar in performance, very, very similar in steel. It's very, very difficult to compare these two. Couple quick things I will say. Number one, the Reate is just slightly, okay, and I mean slightly thinner behind the edge. It's 24 thousandths, while the ZT is 27 thousandths. Now, in cutting, are you going to really notice that? Not a whole lot. I will say there's a very, very slight difference. This knife feels just a little slicier than this one does, while still retaining most of the sort of strength and durability of this particular grind, which is high, okay? So this is definitely, both of these blades are meant to be fairly heavy duty knives, and certainly both of these have that kind of performance, okay? So you're not gonna go cut an apple with either one of these very easily. I mean, I've cut apples with them, and if it's not a super crunchy apple, you're fine, but they're just not made for being the sliciest blades out there, okay? So which one is the winner in my mind? Honestly, I feel like these are too close to call. I think this is going to largely come down to style points, and that's going to be different depending on who you are. Maybe somebody really loves this slight change of angle here. And I wouldn't really call this a compound grind. It's essentially just a slight change of angle to create a little bit of an aesthetic difference in the blade grind there. So some people are going to be really drawn to that. Other people are going to be more attracted to the plainer grind. Whichever camp you fall into, I've got to really call these two a tie. They're just too close, guys. I guess maybe the Reate would edge it out a little bit with that slightly better cutting performance, but it's just barely there, guys. Really, really hard to notice. All right, so moving on now that we've talked about these two blades, and you've had a good chance, I think you can see just by looking at these blades that they're extremely, extremely similar. So let's go ahead now and talk about the action, beginning with the zero tolerance, which is gonna have your typical ZT action, quite smooth, fairly stiff on the detent, really reliable. Flips out every time whenever you want it to. The lock bar is easy to access. It's comfortable. You do have a stainless steel lock bar insert there, over travel stop, all of the things we're used to seeing on a modern folder. Both of these, by the way, use stop pins or stop lugs that are out on the blade rather than in the frame somewhere. All right, so that's an interesting similarity as well. Now, when you flip the Reate, I will say there's a fairly noticeable difference. We have here double row ceramic bearings. We have a detent that is essentially, it's just perfection. We have a flipper tab that is a little more contoured to the way you actually are going to flip the knife. And this is something I've often wondered about why knives do this. So here we have this sort of hook shape. And when you light switch it, you're actually pushing on the little hook itself. I don't know why you couldn't put a flat spot on there that would actually give me something flat to push against, a little more like what the Reate has done. Notice they've even put some jimping on both surfaces so I can get a good purchase. Really the big difference between these two isn't so much the lockup, isn't so much, unlocking the knife. It's really a difference in the smoothness of the action and how dialed in the detent is. Both of these are going for a fairly crisp detent, and both of them have a fairly crisp detent, but the smoothness and the perfection is definitely noticeable on the Reate over the zero tolerance. All right, and there's going to be a little bit of variation from model to model, especially depending on what you've done with it. If you take both of these apart, clean them and lubricate them and all of that, you're going to make some changes there, but the action is just a little nicer on the Reate, and that does stand to reason considering that the dual row ceramic bearings, and the extra price is partially, going into that that really tight attention to detail that delivers that kind of action. So that's lockup and deployment, and I definitely have to give that to the Reate. So far, as we're working our way through here, size and weight, the ZT has come out ahead. Blade design, I'm going to call it a tie. In terms of action, I think the Reate is definitely superior. Now let's look at handle construction and ergonomics. So the ZT has this G10 overlay over titanium scales, standoff construction right there. We've got the movable pocket clip, titanium frame lock construction that we're all fairly used to seeing from, I mean, not only from ZT, but from lots of modern folding knives. Switch over to the Reate here, and we have a different style of construction. I guess we have backspacer instead of standoffs, very nicely milled and anodized. We have the milling lines left in the handle, milled titanium clip with the ceramic ball, anodized blue hardware, decorative pivot collar. So there's definitely a difference between the way these two are put together. Both of these are meant to be fairly tough, fairly usable knives, and I think both of them are. However, the Reate has definitely got a little bit of that extra touch of class, if you will. It's got that little bit of extra attention to detail, some anodization things. Just overall, it looks a little classier, a little more refined, which is kind of interesting because it is sort of the bigger, heavier, bulkier knife, but it does have that finesse, I will say, that is going to attract some people. Now, in terms of how these feel in hand, that's going to be a different discussion, okay? The zero tolerance is very comfortable. It definitely favors a saber grip. It puts your fingers nicely onto that jimping. It does allow for, your thumb to come up here a little bit. Fits my hand very nicely. The Reate definitely feels more substantial in hand. It's a little bit bigger knife, a little bit more hand filling. Both have really, really nice ergos. Both are very comfortable. The one thing I will say is the Reate does allow me to choke up, which is something I personally really like. Not everyone is going to want that. And I do like the way that Reate has done this because it sort of puts your finger here instead of up here on the blade. And that still leaves you with more control, but it leaves your finger back on the handle a little bit. It's a different way of doing a finger choil, and I actually really like the way that they've pulled that off. Now, that does come with a little extra size. So where do these two fit in? Well, both are extremely comfortable in hand. I would feel very comfortable recommending either one for long, hard use. I think it's going to be absolutely fine. The Reate, for me, okay, gets an edge because of that finger choil. I love that option to choke up on the knife just a little bit for those finer cutting tasks. The other point that's going to be a significant difference is the fact that the Reate just has a level of refinement that the ZT is not going to have. Now, that's not going to be for everyone, okay? The Reate is definitely a higher end knife, and so we'd expect some extra touches here and there, a couple of extra finishes that are available. And that's what we see, but remember, you're paying for that. So for me, in terms of ergonomics, just how it feels in hand and how comfortable I am using it for various cutting tasks, I've got to give the edge to the Reate, although it's not as big of a difference as, let's say, we saw on the Action. These are very, very close, and I would absolutely, I wouldn't give someone a hard time who said, actually, Kevin, I feel like the ZT fits my hand better, fits my purposes better, whatever. I wouldn't argue with that for a moment. All right, now, both of these, I think, fall into a similar category. Both of these are kind of a high-end, hard-use knife. They're trying to sort of marry these two philosophies, and they both do it in different ways. The zero tolerance, wow. The Reate does it by having, well put together, very tightly finished components, very thick, heavy-duty parts, and it does a great job of being a heavy duty knife, but it does it with quite a bit of class. It reminds me of, sort of a higher end car where, yes, it's fast. Yes, it'll perform like crazy, but the thing costs a lot of money. So you're almost afraid to make it do what it will do. Okay. The ZT is still very high end, very nicely finished, very confidence inspiring in hand. It's absolutely high end, hard use without question. I think both of these will will hold up to an awful lot of use and will perform really, really well as your daily carry knife. The Reate might be a little more collectible than the ZT. Of course, the 0392 would be a very different story altogether. But what I find interesting about these two knives, and the reason I think this is a kind of a cool comparison to make, is these are both kind of aiming at the same thing, but they approach it very differently. The Reate does it with a little more refinement while still not sacrificing any of the durability and the hard use components. The ZT does it with a little more practicality. You know, we've got some G10 here. We've got the nut over on this side trying to sort of, I don't know, play into that, you know, this is a tool type of mentality, which I absolutely get, where the Reate sort of embraces, hey, this is a high-end knife and we're going to make it look high-end. So I don't know where you're going to come down on that, but I think both of them actually suit. I mean, both of them are very well executed for what they're trying to be, which is a hard-use, high-end knife. And they just do it with, you know, and I guess your personality and your preferences are going to decide which one is going to be more attractive to you. I have to say, I really, really love both of these knives. I carry both of them quite a bit, and I enjoy both of them quite a bit. If you're going to pin me down and say, no, Kevin, you really have to pick just one, probably most of you watching already know this, I'm going to pick the Reate. I really love this knife. I just love the combination of being heavy duty and classy and, you know, executed extremely well. And just, you know, I find this is one of the most well-balanced knives out there. You know, it cuts really well, it feels good in hand, and yet it's heavy duty and hard use and beautiful all at once. The ZT is not going to be quite as attractive. It does a lot of the things that the Reate does, but not quite as well as the Reate does them. And so while I can absolutely appreciate it, and while I think this may be one of the best ZTs that are out there, I would definitely have to pick the Reate if you forced me just to have one. As it stands, I'm able to have and enjoy both of them, and I'm absolutely glad that I can, because this would be really, really hard to pick between in terms of a permanent basis. In terms of this video, I'm going to declare the Reate the winner. However, I would totally not argue with any of you if you want to lean toward the ZT. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.